But it's so you feel that the government actually actively turned against you and began to persecute you in some way.
Indeed. And you know, meeting with congressional staffs, meeting with these investigators, they said, look, it doesn't matter what you guys are going to do. We're going to ride you until you're out of business. So
that's troubling.
Yeah.
And that is, and so the moral of the story for you is, because you're still in business, yes?
Not in government contracting business.
You don't
No.
work with the United States government anymore?
I sold the whole thing. I'm done.
So what do you do?
I started a private equity fund. We invest in energy, mining, agriculture kind of things in Africa.
Get the fuck. Can I tell you something? There is a kid up there who's a trader. Finance? You want to work with this guy? Yeah. So wait, what about the business with the United Arab Emirates with the Somali pirates? That's not you guys anymore?
I'm all done.
You're all done?
Yeah. It's called Frontier Resource Group.
No, settle down. Well, you know, here's the thing. I think this is a fascinating counterpoint to what has been, you know, I think like in most things, there is a little squirrely truth that lies somewhere in there, but, you know, you clearly feel like you've been put through a very difficult and tumultuous.
But let me also be clear.
Yeah.
Whatever nonsense we've been put through, the guys that have lost limbs, their eyes, lost their lives, they pay a vastly higher price, infinitely higher price.
Let me ask you this.
So I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. I'm just saying.
I understand what you're saying. And I did not take it in any way that you were diminishing their sacrifice or their loss. Well, it's a really interesting story, man. And, you know, I feel somewhat sad that it has come to, for you, that feeling of betrayal, because I think that's
an expensive lesson, but move on and on to chapter 2. So.
All right, sir. Well, thank you very much for coming by. I really appreciate
it.
Civilian Warriors is on the bookshelves right now. Erik Prince.
I think in a very real way, it took a guy from West Michigan to put Jon Stewart in his place. What you saw had to be history in terms of television controversial dialogues. I have known Erik since he was a very young man. In fact, before he was married, not very far from here, we met and began a friendship. So I'm seeing the whole experience of who Erik Prince is, what he has been involved in, his family as a person, the sorrows, the joys, the tragedies, and the successes of his life from a very unique vantage point. And this man who studied and finished his education, well, not finished his education, but at least did a good part of it education at Hillsdale, who comes from Holland, whose family and family's extended family are well known in this area of the country, who in his own internal spiritual life seeks Christ, and like all of us, doesn't always reach out far enough to find him, and yet will always be upheld by his love and his mercy. A man who has grown so beautifully and has a whole bunch of beautiful children. I want to welcome him back home to West Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Erik Prince.
Thanks. Good evening. It's great to be back in Michigan. Fortunately, there's not much more snow here than there is in Virginia, so global warming is not working out so well for them, I guess. I just want to thank the Acton Institute guys for having me here. I go way back with them. I remember I met Chris Morin first at an economics lecture at Hillsdale College when I was in school there, and I came late to the dinner, and there was one seat left in the room, and I was reeking of smoke, not from a dorm, not from someone smoking in the dorm, but from a house fire, because I was a fireman. And I came late, and I sat next to this guy, Chris Morin, and we hit it off. And that was just at the time that he was working on starting the Acton Institute with Father Robert, and who I also met a few days later. And we've been long friends and dear friends ever since, and I'm a huge fan of the work they do here. You know, I was an Austrian economics major at Hillsdale, and in the study of faith and liberty and my life experiences from traveling around the world, visiting communist countries as a little kid, seeing what freedom and liberty can do. So I'm a huge fan of the work they do here, and I'm honored to be here tonight. I want to thank my mom and sister and brother-in-law Denny, and I think there's a few cousins in the house, and my Uncle Claire. Thanks for coming out here. It is great to see you and to be with you guys again. I want to thank, I think there's some people from the Amash family. I'm a huge fan of Congressman Justin Amash, a great defender of liberty, and someone that will stand up to the system in Washington, which certainly needs to be stood up to. I'll take you through a little bit of what I talk about in the book, and then I'll open it up to questions. I'm probably more comfortable in the Q&A environment, having been through the back and forth too many times to count. You know, growing up in West Michigan, I had a great childhood. I had a dad that worked very hard. He was a self-made entrepreneur, and those words of persistence and determination rang in my ears from a very early age. He didn't let me work. He didn't let me have a job in high school because he had worked 40 hours a week already through middle school and high school because his dad died when he was only 13. So I had an idyllic childhood. I had a mom that stayed home and very nurturing, and a dad who pushed hard at giving me a lot of experiences outside the norm. And I've tried to live with that parable of the talents ringing in my ears, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I certainly hope I meet my maker someday, tired, beat up, and exhausted from a long journey, not tan, rested, and ready. But he going to work with my dad was never really an option after college. It was never discussed, and so I had to go do something on my own. I don't think he bargained that I was going to be a Navy SEAL, but it was a great job. Still my favorite job. It was a great organization. If you have a young son, I encourage them to consider going and serving the military. There's no other job that comes right out of high school or college, for that matter, that'll give you so much responsibility and so much experience at an early age. So I went and did that, and I left early because my dad died, and my wife then was sick with cancer. And, you know, to help sort out the family farm, so to speak. And I never really intended to be a defense contractor. I started Blackwater really as a way to stay connected to the SEAL teams, that community I loved. And, you know, special operations units in the United States have been using private facilities like that since the 1970s. Small ranges to go and practice, because it's much easier for a unit to go to a private facility like that because it's efficient, you show up on time, things are organized, versus going to a government one, which is, you know, I guess, why would you send things via FedEx versus the Postal Service? It's kind of the same argument sometimes if you really wanted to get there overnight. So again, started it never intending to be a defense contractor, but one thing led to the other, and we just kept saying yes. When the Columbine tragedy happened, we turned around and we built a mock high school, and we ended up training tens of thousands of police officers to go from a surround and negotiate mentality to a solve the immediate threat. Then when the USS Cole was blown up, you know, the U.S. Navy had optimized to fight enemy forces from beyond the horizon, from hundreds of miles away. Didn't know how to deal with that threat that was 100 meters away. And so we ended up training tens of thousands of Navy sailors after the Cole was blown up. Of course, that was a Navy ship blown up in a harbor in Yemen. 17 Americans died that day. And then, of course, when 9/11 happens, you know, we'd been doing a lot of work for the various U.S. government customers, and they took us along. You know, one of the things my dad, between growing up on my dad's knee, growing up in industrious, entrepreneurial West Michigan, and then, of course, in college, I guess I learned 3 different ways to build a business. One is product innovation. Build a product that the customer has to have. Build a super efficient business. Drive out every bit of cost out of it. You know, wring all the fat out. And third is customer intimacy, is to make yourself indispensable to your customer. Well, we tried to make ourselves indispensable to our customers, and they took us along with them. And so we were pulled into we went from training to doing a lot of aviation, security work, and we grew. And we just kept saying yes, and we were pulled into Afghanistan, and then into Iraq. Then we were doing airlift in the spring of 2003. We ended up buying a small aviation business. We had one leased Casa 212. Not a very sexy aircraft. If you look in the book, it's there's a picture with a lion sleeping under the wing of one of the aircraft. We ended up buying a lot of those, and we ended up doing resupply, even really changing the way that the U.S. military resupplied itself in a tough insurgency like Afghanistan. Because these small fire bases, where you'd have 40 or 50 soldiers living on the top of this little mountain or a little plateau, and they need resupply. And if you try to resupply them by helicopter, the helicopters get shot down because they're slow moving and loud. And of course, if you try to do it by truck, the bad guys mine the roads. So we use these very simple cargo aircraft flying over at 150 feet, almost like a dump truck right over a tennis court sized drop zone, resupplying these guys. It was an extremely satisfying mission, bringing them everything from beans, bullets, parts, ammunition, whatever it is. And you want to put it inside the drop zone, because if you miss and it goes down the side of that cliff, those poor guys in that fire base have to mount up and walk down and carry thousands of pounds of equipment back up the mountain. So we loved serving those kind of customers, and we grew. You know, we as I talk about in the book, 95, 97% of all our revenue was competitively bid. I'm a big believer in competition. I'm a big believer in efficiencies. Seeing my dad's business having to fight through the 80s and the onslaught of Japanese competition and forcing those kind of efficiencies on the automotive business, I tried to apply that in the defense industry, which unfortunately there's not been a lot of efficiency or focus on discipline of late. So, you know, if you've read the book, you know, we got caught in the politics of the Iraq War when in the Vietnam War, the anti-war left went after the troops. And in this case, it was, you know, volunteer military. They went after contractors. And I think I and Blackwater represented everything they love to hate. I came from a conservative family from West Michigan that was successful. I owned the business. I was a Navy SEAL. We had the largest private weapons training facility in America. And sometimes our men were armed, and sometimes they had to use their weapons to do their jobs. And, you know, between Iraq and Afghanistan, we ended up doing more than 100,000 missions, protective missions, and no one under our care was ever killed or injured, ever. 41 of our men were killed in action doing that mission, and dozens, if not hundreds more, severely wounded. But we had a perfect safety record. So, and the idea that they were trigger happy, you know, every time the guys would have to discharge their weapon, there was, of course, an after-action report, a lot of paperwork on it, and it turns out that less than 0.5% of all those missions resulted in a discharge of firearms. So, and, you know, we used people that were veterans, that were served the U.S. military or law enforcement already, honorably, and they put them through extensive additional screening, psychological evaluations, medical, a lot more training, and judgment testing, and put them out to do the same mission again. So we really employed volunteers that volunteered yet again. We couldn't stop-loss them. We couldn't make them go. They got up to volunteer to do that job every day. I'd say one of my proudest moments was after I spoke at the War College, the Industrial College of the Armed Forces in Washington, D.C., and I go in. I got out of the Navy as a SEAL, as a lieutenant. That's like a captain in 03. That's a pretty junior officer. And I go into this room, and there's 300 colonels, and they all pop tall when I come in. They come to attention. And so that was an unusual circumstance. And afterwards, one of those colonels came up to me and he said, look, I just came back from brigade command in Baghdad. And so he had 3,000 to 4,000 guys working for him. And he said at the top of the dashboards of the Humvees of his soldiers were the Blackwater call signs and frequencies, because they knew if they got in trouble, the Blackwater guys would come for them. So my guidance to the people, to our people, was the Good Samaritan rule is always in effect. And you're not just there to do a job, you're there to be part of the total effort. So building a business, as my dad said, building your own business, building it from scratch is a great and satisfying endeavor, full of challenges, but it's great when you build a machine, you build a team, and it's a great satisfying experience. It's a awful experience to see it dismembered by massive onset of political attacks And as Robert said in the opening, when the congressional staff are saying, we don't care what you guys do, we're going to ride you until you're out of the business. For we who volunteered to yet go again, and we were the only company that showed up with our own aircraft in Iraq and Afghanistan, hundreds of armored vehicles. So we put real capital at risk, and we put our people at risk doing those jobs. And then to have it shredded by the politics of Washington, I kind of wrote the book as a cautionary tale for the next entrepreneur that answers that call, because there'll be more dire circumstances that the U.S. government sees itself in, and I just want the next guy to be way more cautious as to how quickly the sand can shift and the hot air of Washington can become a blowtorch. What am I doing now? I started a private equity fund a few years ago, and we do investing in energy, mining, agriculture kind of opportunities in Africa. It's called the Frontier Resource Group, and it's the last great frontier. I would rather deal with the vagaries and dangers of Africa and politics and tribe and insurgency than deal with the vagaries and politics and insanity of Washington. I think it's a safer place to invest in Africa, that is. But I figured out, we're good at organizing and doing things on a budget in difficult places. And whether it was building the Afghan border police and building the base and training tens of thousands of policemen and equipping them and leading them, then building a mine, building an oil field, sorting out those logistics is all part of it and very doable. And then just last month, in January, I was named the chairman of a publicly listed company in Hong Kong, and the mandate there, that company has a bunch of capital on its balance sheet, and their mission, my mission for them, is to build out an aviation logistics business in Africa. Not another Blackwater, but a company that can help operate and sort out their logistics and make sure it runs smoothly in very challenged areas, whether you have roads that wash out from rainy season, plenty of criminality, plenty of those kind of problems and challenges. We've gotten good at sorting that out. So I would say in a year and a half from now, if you're going to Africa, call me, because if you need medevac, we are the ones that you're going to want to call, because we will get to anywhere on the continent and we will get you out of a bad circumstance. There's one chapter in the book that I particularly like, and it's some of the good rescues we've done. There's one in Mali that comes to mind, and that's why I put the picture of the casa in there with a lion sleeping under the wing, because that was taken very shortly before that rescue happened. And there was a team of U.S. Special Forces guys who were up there training the Mali army. This is just in the area of Timbuktu, actually. I'm not kidding. That's a real city right in the transition area of Mali, from where the somewhat growing area to north of that, it's pure Sahara. And so these SF guys, U.S. guys, are at this camp. They're teaching, and a big storm comes up. One of our aircraft was there. The aircraft was tied down, and it got pushed 100 meters sideways, damaged the landing gear and the wingtip, unflyable. And it picked up the tent that the SF guys were in, and it tossed it like a wash machine, and it broke one guy's back, another guy's pelvis, two other guys with limb injuries, killed one guy, and another guy had major internal bleeding. And so we called their other aircraft, probably the one that had the lion sleeping under the wing, and they flew in there. Our guys landed on a couple sets of headlights in the desert in the middle of a sandstorm, and our medic worked that guy for 36 hours straight. And it was down to the point that they'd given him every fluid they had, every bit of blood. They were doing sterile water, even just trying to keep some kind of fluid in him, because it turns out his spleen had ruptured. And they got him back to the capital of Burkina Faso, which is Ouagadougou. And that guy wasn't going to die that day. We weren't going to let him. And our guys actually went to a drugstore, pooled their cash, bought some controlled meds, and they did surgery on him. And they ended up doing an emergency splenectomy on him and saved his life. And, so those are the kind of people we had. And I remember right after that, within a week or two, the first Navy SEAL was going to become the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command. So me being from that community, we were going to show up for that event. And the admiral, who we were working for at the time, Admiral Bill McRaven, who was later the guy that led and commanded the bin Laden raid, came up and gave me a big bear hug. And he said, you guys you did some really sporty flying. And I said, sir, that's why we have sporty pilots. So I grew up flying around, co-pilot seat of some of my dad's planes, because he had a big focus on getting salespeople out to the customers and customers in to see what Prince Automotive was doing. And so growing up around that, I remember I soloed the morning of my 16th birthday and got my license, pilot's license before I drove a car. But so when we can do missions like that, it makes it all worthwhile. With that, I'll be happy to take questions. 'Cause I didn't have any definite formal speech, but I can take just about any question you ask and throw at me. So with that, sir.
Do you have the same rules of engagement as the military?
Okay, the question is, do we have the same rules of engagement as the military? No. We had more restricted ones where our people were there, if they're doing a security mission, was to play defense. And so it was not to stay and win in a firefight. It was to move the protectee through the danger area and get them out of there. And so if you had to use lethal force, there was called the use of force continuum, just like the police officer might have here. There's certain rules on when they can draw and fire their weapon. And so there is sirens, flashing lights, laser pointers from time to time, water bottles thrown at cars. It sounds bizarre, but you're trying to keep cars back from you in an area where there are car bombs that are going off on a daily basis, and a car bomb big enough to destroy you and all your colleagues in a fully armored vehicle. So those are the defensive rules. Those are briefed and given to us by the customer, State Department, or the Department of Defense, whoever it is you're working for over there, on a daily basis. And speaking of the rules of engagement, it's the other tough thing is when you're working for the State Department, they dictate, of course, those rules of engagement, but they dictate the route that you will take, the vehicle you will take, the time of day you will go. And so if you're a bad guy, there's plenty of deer hunters here in the room, and if you're going to hunt a deer, you hunt at a trail intersection, correct? You figure out what the patterns are, and you wait there for them in ambush. So when the State Department is saying you're going to drive a polished Suburban, GMC Suburban, with lights and sirens every day and go through these same traffic circles, it makes it pretty easy for the enemy to set up on you. Contrast to that, so that's when we're working for state. If we're working for an NGO and we can control how we go in our routes, we never got any firefights. Of course, never anybody got any hurt. But we take I remember buying a whole bunch of Lincoln Continentals, fully armored, and then completely destroying the paint jobs, giving them an old, beat-up taxi look, hanging the curtains in the windows, and making people go low profile, because you can't kill what you can't see. And if you don't give your enemy an obvious target, much harder to target you. Sir.
Erik, I'm a Christian Reformed pastor, and I'm just curious. I know the family you were raised in is a family that loves the Lord. You were raised to love the Lord. Could you speak a little bit on your faith and how that shaped you, where it's brought you today, and especially going through some of those difficult times, and even some moral judgments about the direction to go based on your upbringing and, where the Lord has led you today, especially?
Okay. Well, I was raised in a Christian Reformed church, and I became a Roman Catholic in college, and I would say that was it was largely a historical search, because I wanted to worship in the same way the apostles did. But without delving into the Catholic versus Protestant debate, I would say that my faith has always played a great part in my life. If you read the book, you also know I made some great mistakes along the way, terrible mistakes. So I'm thankful I have a faith that also includes forgiveness. I would say the kind of people we employed were from all walks of life. And we had SEALs and Rangers and Special Forces guys and Delta Force guys, and you name it. It was every kind of rough and tumble guy you could imagine. And we gave them the finest equipment, the finest training, the finest colleagues to go out with. And as a company, I wanted to do more. We actually hired the former chief chaplain of the Marine Corps to be our company pastor. And his name was Father George Pucciarelli. And he had just finished the design. So he came to Blackwater 3 or 4 days a week, and we did religious services around any of the major holidays, and he was there to talk to family members, to deployed guys, our wounded guys, and he kept in touch, and he was just like the military has chaplains. He was our company chaplain, because I guess I wanted to round him out and provide the full armor of God for the people. And it breaks my heart, but we'd actually designed, he had completed the designs on a great chapel that we were going to build on the compound, because I wanted a place for our guys to worship and set themselves. You know, these are guys that are coming out of sometimes challenged lives, and a challenged life, and being on the road and fighting and have engaged in offensive combat operations as a special operator, and now they're going to play defense, but they're going to deploy, but they still have families, and trying to keep that all in balance. That is probably one of the underreported challenges is how bad or how hard is repeated deployments for 6 months, 12 months, 15 months at a time is on families. I mean, I remember deploying when I was in the SEAL teams, and I burned up a lot of those little satellite cards back then, and that was really before email and certainly before Skype and all those other wonderful items that make the world a little smaller. As I went before Congress, I remember I started that day going to Mass, and I felt more at peace because I had a lot of people praying for me. My mom told me she was praying for me. My siblings did. I got 2 great phone calls the night before. One was from Chuck Colson, and who'd been a great spiritual mentor to me, and Ollie North. And he said, "Hey, listen, I was a Marine. I did 48 times before Congress. You were a SEAL. I know you can handle it once." So keeping, you know, it's, I know God has a plan, and I know, you know, there's been certain parts he's made that really blindingly obvious. You know, in September of 2008, I was in Afghanistan, and my then 1-year-old son, Charlie, slipped out of the back of the house, and he drowned in our pool. And, well, the kids, my 12-year-old son then, Christian, found him purple and motionless, floating in the pool, face down. And Christian scooped him out, and Christian, as a 12-year-old, had his CPR qual from Blackwater that summer before, and he started doing CPR on him, and it ended up saving his life. And so Charlie's made a full recovery. And that's only half the story, because I was in Afghanistan, and of course, as soon as I heard it, I immediately started coming home. And it's good that I did, because my original schedule had me going from Kabul to Islamabad a couple days later, and I would have been checking into the Islamabad Marriott Hotel at the hour it was hit by a 2,000-pound truck bomb, and it killed 55 people and wounded 240 some more. If you saw the movie about the Bin Laden raid, they portray that bombing of a hotel. Zero Dark 30, yes. That hotel bombing that blows up that almost gets the 2 CIA agents, I was supposed to be checking in there that day at that hour. So God certainly has a plan. And you know, Christian even said to his brother, feeling awful, because they were supposed to be watching their brother when it happened. And he said, there's got to be something in God's plan for this. So.
Two-part question, Eric. One, in your time at Blackwater, did you ever turn down an opportunity or a contract because either the political entity or client really wasn't aligned politically or spiritually with your values? And then the second part, what would you say to someone like me who, after reading your book and hearing you speak, really admire what you've done at Blackwater, but are concerned about a powerful, successful company like Blackwater maybe falling into the hands of an owner or a management team that really doesn't have your respect for democratic values or your Christian faith?
Okay. First half of the question again, help me out.
Did you ever turn down an
Do
opportunity?
we yes, okay. Look, anything that a U.S. company does is licensed by the State Department. And, you know, we were hired by the U.S. government primarily to work for U.S. entities or to go abroad and train other countries' capabilities. So we built a maritime unit in Azerbaijan, or we built a helicopter unit in Jordan, those kind of things. I'll tell you, there's one that we really wanted to do and were denied from doing. In 2005, I was invited, I was in Africa, and I got a call. The Ugandan military intelligence people really wanted to see me. And so I go there, and I go into this room, and it's lined with Ugandan military officers. And they said, we would like your help in capturing or killing Joseph Kony. So you don't know who that is, but he is a butcher, an awful guy. He's the guy that that kills parents, press gangs their kids into being child soldiers. He is an awful, evil man. If there is a devil walking the earth, he's it. So the Ugandans wanted to hire us, and they said, "Look, how would you do this? Put a team together, put some helicopter lift together with some signals intelligence, a special operations unit to go finish this." And I said, "It's great. We know how to do this. I'll put a presentation together, but I have to get a license to do that." So we go back to Washington, we go back to States, and we put it through that licensing process. Now the sad thing is, at the same time, right after George Bush was elected in early '05, I know this because there was a National Security Cabinet meeting where one of my colleagues was in that room, and he said, "I do not want to leave office with this administration with Joseph Kony alive." So he's telling the head of the CIA, the State Department, the DOD, and the National Security Advisor, get Kony. Clear guidance from the top. Customer wants to hire us at the bottom to do this job. And the bureaucrats, those idiots at the State Department, never granted us the license, and Joseph Kony still walks the earth. So I am angry about that one. The second part of your question, the question about a company like Blackwater being run by some other entity. Here's the thing. Blackwater was never a private army. It's a complete misnomer. It was a facility that we trained Americans, primarily Americans, or other foreigners that were licensed to come here by the State Department. We employed veterans, people that already wore the uniform, U.S. military or law enforcement people. We didn't just take guys off the street and turn them loose with guns. We needed people with experience and discipline and ethics to do that already. So I didn't employ robots. We employed people that had plenty stiff spines themselves. They were no wallflowers to begin with. So the idea of me forcing them or press ganging them to become Erik Prince's army, no way. No way. They were there to do a job. They were there to serve their country. They were volunteering to do it again. And on top of that, our company, we had an employee handbook that included swearing the oath to the Constitution of the United States, just like they did when they joined the military or joined the law enforcement. And swearing allegiance to the Constitution and obeying the Constitution is something in really short supply in America these days.
I was going to ask you about Joseph Kony. Is there any opportunity that you could go into Uganda and get rid of him?
Here's the thing. The U.S. government decided to get involved a couple years ago, and they completely gummed it up because it's being run out of embassies, and they are completely restricted as to where they can go. Joseph Kony doesn't obey borders, so he moves between Uganda, Central African Republic. He can pop over to the Congo. There's a big national park in the Congo he lives in. If you're going to go after someone, you've got to go after them. It's kind of like that Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, right? Remember that movie? When they're going around, they're robbing trains, and then finally some guys start coming after them, and they keep looking back. Who are those guys? And they cross the national border. They look back. Those guys are still following him. Who are those guys? They were the Pinkertons. It's a private organization hired by the railroad company to finish that job. Sir.
I got out as a lowly 03 myself in the Navy, so
03 is around the world.
there you go. You actually touched on my question I was going to ask, and when I was in the Navy, there was a lot of distrust with the civilian security when I was there, and so the question I'm asking is with respect to loyalty and honor and the oath which you just talked about, and in context of the whole Edward Snowden thing, you know, what is can you comment on the loyalty with the civilian workforce, the civilian
Civilian contractor.
the civilian contractors, and you know, just your statement on them working with the government, and when you've got the government, there's, in my opinion, there's a problem that the government has to hire these civilians to do this work, especially with the Edward Snowden thing.
Well, if you look at the great security breaches in American history before Snowden, they were all government employees, whether it's Aldrich Ames, Hansen, you name it. the guy that gave up all the radio codes, Walker, in the 80s. They're government employees. The guy was in the military. He was an active Navy enlisted guy. The idea of contractors filling that gap, a lot of that comes from government hiring practices, because once you hire someone, that comes down to civil service policy. Once you hire a guy in the government, it is almost impossible to get rid of him. You literally have to lead them away in handcuffs to end their employment. And if you do, even if they're there for 4 or 6 years, they still end up getting benefits and pensions, and it's crazy. So until you reform that entitlement system, not just for the civilian sector, but for government employees, you're going to be driven towards greater affordability and flexibility of firing somebody that comes from a private contractor doing it. Now, I'm happy to address the Snowden issue because I think having seen the general cluelessness of congressional oversight of the intelligence communities and the horrendous oversized bloat of the intelligence budget writ large, the NSA is way too big, collects way too much, and it's unnecessary, and people hide behind incompetence by calling it classified. So I don't know if the guy's a hero or a traitor, but I think it was at least a very important public service. And I wish Justin Amash had been successful in passing that bill, in paring down the scope and reach, because right now I believe the federal government is trampling the Fourth Amendment. Hey, Fred, how are you?
What's your take on Benghazi?
The question is, what's my take on Benghazi? Well, if we had been on the job, the U.S. ambassador would be alive. That I am confident of. You had politics driving security in the field, in the sense of there were local guards hired, Libyans that were unvetted, unarmed, okay? Fortunately, a couple of them actually gave some indication that there was an attack coming, but they all ran as soon as any attack did come. The government employees, the diplomatic security agents that were there, underperformed that night, okay? Some of them were found hiding in closets. If it were not for the Good Samaritan response of a Libyan doctor, that's who called somebody from the embassy to say, hey, your ambassador's here, come pick up his body. So for a personal representative of the President of the United States to be taken out and murdered in cold blood on the anniversary of 9/11, and it was not because of a movie, it had nothing to do with a movie. You had simultaneous attacks in Cairo, where you actually had the Al-Qaeda battle flag hoisted over U.S. soil in Cairo as well. They stormed the walls in the Cairo embassy. The American Community School of Tunis, the counterpart of where my kids went to school in Abu Dhabi, was burned that day. That got my kids' attention. So not only was the security preparations awful, thank God there was other contractors that responded. The two SEAL contractors, Woods and Doherty, repeatedly asked their CIA base chief, because you had the consulate and the annex. There was a CIA annex a mile or so away. The base chief would not allow them to go. Okay? If they had not violated that guy's order and gone and evacuated 28 some other Americans, there would have been a lot more Americans died that night. Okay? So again, if they were in the military, those guys would have been awarded probably a Navy Cross or higher for valor. And then on top of that all, the lack of response of other parts of the Department of Defense, because they were barred from doing so. There was F-18s off the coast. There were guys on the roof in that firefight protecting those people who were asking for, not even for an airstrike, just fly that F-18 over at 500 knots right over the city and scare the hell out of these people. That's all they're asking for, and they wouldn't do it. There was a C-130 full of Special Forces troopers, blades turning, okay, on the aircraft, locked and loaded, everything they need, 55 some dudes, not allowed to go. They were told to stand down. Look, the U.S. military spends billions of dollars building a combat search and rescue capability because we have a habit in America of taking care of our own, of going after that pilot that's down, those lost sailors, wherever they are. When you have the personal representative of the President of the United States, U.S. consulate under attack, and to shut it down. Why? Because it didn't fit the political narrative at the time. Because Al-Qaeda was supposed to be on their back heel. Peace, love, and happiness. Al-Qaeda didn't get that brief. President or the SecDef are the only two people that can do that.
Hey, Eric. All right, there we go. You mentioned operating in the African environment or in that context, and planning on doing a lot of that in the future. I was wondering if you had any commentary on the way that has been done before by contractors such as Sandline International, Executive Outcomes, groups like that. What you would do differently from the way that they've operated in that sort of environment, and
look, what we're doing now as a logistics provider, aviation provider, is not looking to go offensively win wars. I have huge respect for Executive Outcomes. Okay, if you've never heard of a company, there was a South African company that came out in the 90s, and they were the government of Angola was almost overrun after a free election, and the losers of the election didn't like it, and they were almost overrun the country. Executive Outcomes came in and built a unit which ended that civil war. While they were doing that, if you've ever heard of a country called Sierra Leone, was also nearly overrun by an awful organization called the Revolutionary United Front, not far off of Joseph Kony and the LRA, the same kind of drug-crazed psychopaths. And they're the ones that brought you long sleeve or short sleeve with a machete, delimbing people, bayoneting babies, burning churches, every level of awful evil that walked the earth. And Executive Outcomes was hired. They sent 200 guys, and they ended that war. They retook the country. They drove these psychopaths out to a bargaining table, and about 9 months after they're there was a free election. And then, oddly enough, Susan Rice, who was at the State Department at the time, who was our current national security advisor, demanded that Executive Outcomes had to leave the country. They could not stay. They could not even leave a reaction force of 30 guys there to protect the country and the government. And within 3 months of EO leaving the country, the RUF, these psychopaths, had overrun the country again. And the UN sent in 11,000 peacekeepers at a cost of $1 billion a year. Thanks, Susan Rice. Oh, sorry.
Eric, I have the microphone.
Send it.
And first of all, I applaud you. I'm assuming you're here to support Acton, and I think that's wonderful because this institution is phenomenal, so it's a great night. The second thing is, I grew up in Holland and I marched in wooden shoes. I don't know if you did or not, but I also had a brief relationship with your father, partnership, and I think he'd be proud of what you did. He died way too early and stuff. And this one is just for you. When I came in there and I went to park the car, these guys were all carrying signs. I handed the keys to the wrong guy.
Oh, no. Well, maybe it's his first car.
But, yeah, okay. I think they did take it away. Anyway, my point is...
Maybe he can drive it to his first job.
He probably will. My point is, I knew you, I knew your family. I think your sister crashed a boat into the Wolverine ferry in Holland at one time. But,
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, well. Anyway, how do you respond? I didn't even know about Blackwater till you got a black eye for the wrong reason because the press gets a hold of it. You did a great job serving this country, but how do you respond to a handful of people that have a negative image about Blackwater?
Pretty easily. You know, in the Sioux warrior culture, ancient Indian culture, they regarded you a warrior not by how far you could run or fast you could, or hard you could throw a spear. They regarded you a warrior by who your enemies were. And if the Hezbollah, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and some crazy left-wing people like Henry Waxman are my enemies, I am okay with that. And we live in a pluralist society, and there seems to be 40% of the people that thinks everything is great and on the right track in America right now, and I couldn't disagree more. And so I'm perfectly okay with people not liking me. I know what we do. I woke up every day comfortable and proud of what the guys were doing. Did we do everything perfect all the time? No way. I employed people. I didn't employ robots. And even when you use a turbine engine, okay, on a jet, sometimes the engine breaks. that engine only has 2 or 3 moving parts. We employed thousands of people who were, who make mistakes. So I'm perfectly comfortable with the job we do. I'm perfectly comfortable who my detractors and enemies are. And I wrote the book really to set the record straight, and hopefully people read the book. And maybe we even do a movie, since not enough people read books anymore and they only watch a movie. Sir. I kept the name Blackwater, so I still own the brand. We'll have T-shirts out here again soon, because oddly enough, there's a still high demand for those. But I sold it to a couple Texas billionaires, and I think they wanted to be to do something operational, I guess. And I don't know. I don't think it's gone quite as well for them.
Eric,
Hey, Claire, Uncle Claire.
what's the training that these Al Qaeda and so on? What status are they? Are they good, or are they organized? It just you wonder sometimes how they attack and their tactics. They're working certainly, but are they disciplined? Give a rundown on what these people do
Sure.
and how they train.
Like Margaret Thatcher said, we have to be lucky every day. They only have to be lucky once. The most effective, well-trained, capable terrorist organization in the world is Hezbollah. Okay? It's a Lebanese organization. Hezbollah, Hezbollah means the party of God. It's a Iranian-sponsored, Iranian-trained, Iranian-equipped. Very capable fighters. That's who's carrying the water for Assad in Syria right now and doing most of the combat operations. Look, when you have people that are willing to commit suicide and think as part of their religious beliefs that they're going to a higher heaven for having done so, that's a tough one to combat. That being said, I just want to take you through a very near miss that almost happened in Detroit a few years ago. You remember the near bombing that happened on a flight from Amsterdam into Detroit, okay? A guy named Abu Muttalib. He's a Nigerian. His father, knowing that his son had been radicalized, went to the CIA station chief in Abuja, Nigeria, and said, look, watch out, my son's radical, put him on the list. There was signals intelligence that said, watch out for the Nigerian who's been training in Yemen because he's going to do something in aviation. Still nothing. All these warning signs. No, he still got a visa, he got on an airplane, all the rest. He gets on the aircraft and flies from Abuja to Amsterdam, makes it through security again, and thank goodness for his sweaty crotch, because that's the only thing that saved that airplane. It was a very well-built bomb, okay? There's a Palestinian bomb maker who was operating in he was operating in Lebanon for quite a while, and he left and was hiding out in Yemen, and that's where he built that device. And it was designed to be fired with a syringe, just like a diabetic might have with them. If you recall the reports after that, there was a bright flash and a loud popping sound. That was the firing device going. But the main charge was something called petin, which is fortunately hydrophilic. It absorbs water. And that dude was sweating, because I guess he was committing suicide, and for the 14-hour flight, that device absorbed all his sweat. And so when the primary charge went, bright flash, loud pop, the main charge didn't go. It just burned him, and it didn't blow up. So $80 billion intelligence budget fails to miss all those signs. His sweaty crotch saved the day.
You commented briefly on Henry Waxman. I was noticing that he's retiring soon, and I was wondering if you're going to be invited to the retirement party and if he's been sending you any Christmas cards lately.
No, I'm gonna skip that one. Look, he is the opposite of, I think, everyone. I would say almost anyone in West Michigan would believe. I believe in the opportunity that America provides with an economy that you can, if you work hard and study hard and take risks, that you can be successful in whatever it is you endeavor to do. And I don't believe that government has to be there to suppress and to force equality and to force itself on our lives. And so I am 180 degrees out from him.
I was a battalion surgeon with the Marine Corps in Desert Storm, And one of my classmates in Officer Candidate School was Richard Marchenko.
Okay.
And I first became appalled at injustice when I read his story and what the Navy did to him after he tried to, well, first form SEAL Team 6, and then the Red Cell to warn the Navy commanders right at the base level about the threats of terrorism. And do you see a parallel between you and Mr. Machenko, Commander Machenko?
Who he's talking about is the guy that founded SEAL Team 6. After Desert One, the debacle of trying to rescue the U.S. hostages held in Tehran, okay, the Army stood up a unit called Special Operations Task Force Delta, and a special helicopter unit to carry them around called TF-160. And there was a SEAL component, a SEAL equivalent called SEAL Team 6. And he's talking about the founder of SEAL Team 6, who was a pretty irreverent guy, and he definitely busted some paradigms. And I think the thing that, I don't know, but I suspect what happened, particularly the first thing he did after SEAL Team 6 is he started something called Red Cell, which is a small team of SEALs who are very, SEALs tend to be innovative and fly by the seat of their pants. It's kind of a culture amongst those guys to basically behave like terrorists, okay? To probe security of Navy facilities, to test out, is the security really that good for that nuclear submarine or a base or whatever? And he showed the Navy how absolutely void of security they were, and I think that's probably made him run afoul. You know, look, hindsight, I probably shouldn't have said my goal for Blackwater is to try to do for the Defense Department what FedEx did for the Postal Service. That probably ruffled a lot of feathers. I didn't mean that with any malign intent. When I see FedEx and what Fred Smith did, you know, I think he wrote the paper when he was at Harvard, and he got a C or a failing grade on it because the instructor or this professor said, well, it'll never work. Why would you need to send something overnight when you have a fax machine? But he built that business, and it had a transformative effect on all of our lives because you have overnight shipping, and it actually made the Postal Service become more efficient and more innovative. And I think any business that provides people with a way to be better at what they do, to be excellent, and to be proud of what they do is a great and honest and positive thing. And it's the same thing that the Acton Institute would say about, you know, we as human beings are called to serve God and to work hard and to be productive in our labor and innovative and providing people a way to do a job better, smarter, for a farmer to collect hay off a field with a machine instead of with his arms. It's a great thing. Whatever incremental move you do by risking your knowledge and capital and time to improve somebody's life and livelihood and to make it better. Look, I employed thousands of people, and we had a really unusual subset of people. I mean, I was probably the largest employer of former special operations people in America, if not the world. And so seeing the cultural characteristics of those guys and what they could do by putting their kids through college and putting a down payment on a house, that is all really satisfying work. I just want to say one other thing on, you know, our guys were former military or law enforcement. If they were in the military, many of the things they would have done that they did in action would have qualified them for significant medals of valor, whether it's a Bronze Star, a Silver Star, all the way up to a Medal of Honor performance. But we're a private company, so we couldn't do those. So we actually had a medal made. It was called the Blackwater Defensive Liberty Medal. It was a company logo on one side. On the other side, it was an image of St. Michael the Archangel with that broadsword. He's about to stick it to the devil. And you know, we had silver ones made, we had gold-plated silver, and we had some solid gold ones made. And the guys really took those seriously. They really appreciated it, and you know, it's a satisfying way to recognize great performance. Yes, sir.
Erik, welcome back
Oh,
to
hey,
West
Mike.
Michigan.
How are you?
Good. One thing you don't talk about in your book that maybe you could enlighten me on, they mentioned it a little bit in the video before you came out, was, if I remember right, you were starting some projects in Somalia to defend against hijackings of tanker ships and captains being held for ransom. And obviously the new movie that's out is going to bring a lot more of that to light. Can you kind of tell us where Blackwater was at the time that you got out of the business?
I'd sold all the company by then, and I was, Somali piracy, I'm sure you heard about in the last 5 or 6 years, was getting to be a really major problem. 30, 40, 50 ships held at any one time. And that happened because Somalia was the longest coastline in Africa, was completely lawless. And whatever fledgling government was there lacked the wherewithal to project power, to project law and order, not only from a town to the coastline, but certainly from the coastline out to sea. And so pirates would, it was a business model. It was a very successful business model. They would actually gather money, and if you had an RPG, you chip that in with that, or an AK or a boat, and they would send pirates out to sea, and there'd be a takedown crew of 6 to 8 guys, and they would scamper aboard a ship, take it over, and they would drive it to the coast of Somalia, and they'd sit on it for 6 months, 8 months, a year, however long it took. And in that time, they're negotiating with the ship owner, not because the ship owner cared at all about the crew. He just wanted a ship back. Seriously, it's very, very, very cold. So my concept was not to chase pirates around the Indian Ocean, because there's tens of thousands of square miles, millions, but instead build a law enforcement unit that could project law and order wherever it was, and deny sanctuary to those pirates. So there was some donor nations. They ended up building it provided the funds. A police force was built called the Puntland Marine Police Force. Their first operation was 500 kilometers one way. Now you talk about the logistics challenge of operating in Somalia, a country that's been melted down for 30 years, and then you're going to drive. But they did it. And if you notice, as soon as that unit went operational, piracy plummeted. So from 2012 and 13, the piracy rates have gone way down. So that was a very low-cost, low-budget way to do it. They ran Toyota pickup trucks and Russian 6x6s, and the whole thing cost less than what the ransom was, than the pirates were collecting in ransom per year. So it was an interesting intellectual exercise.
Mr. Prince,
Yep.
You say that there have been, I guess there's a problem with the lack of efficiency when it comes to the U.S. stopping things like Benghazi and that almost fatal bombing on the airplane. So is your solution to that then an increase in private companies like Blackwater, like nationwide, when it comes to security and solving those problems?
No, I would say make the entire thing smaller. The U.S. defense budget is so big and so bloated that it serves to be counterproductive. It's would you rather have a 150-pound triathlete or a 300-pound triathlete? I mean, it's so big. I mean, look, the U.S. government, the U.S. taxpayers, spends more than half of the rest of the world combined, okay? If you add up everything America spends, it's more than the rest of the world combined in defense and intelligence spending. It's a ridiculous number. It's way too high. It doesn't need to be that much. Private companies have a role to play by serving as a private sector benchmark, okay? Just like when before FedEx, you didn't know what it should cost to send a package from LA to New York overnight. There was no way to measure that because everyone would have said that's impossible. There's no way a private company can do that. But, when I was born, right around the time of Apollo 11, if you had said then that putting man in space was an inherently governmental function, now the only way the U.S. gets a load up to the International Space Station is with a private company called SpaceX. So private sector has a role to play in measuring cost, measuring that efficiency, benchmarking against, just like it's great to be able to shop a Nissan versus a Toyota versus a Honda versus a Chevy. Competition is a good thing. And so I'm not saying that we need to have private companies building offensive combat units. Not at all. That's not where the big cost is. The big cost is in all those logistics functions, all those training and supply functions. A lot of those things can be done sometimes with the government, sometimes with the private sector, but make it compete, and you'll save a ridiculous amount of money.
One more question.
Over here.
Could you expand, Eric, a little bit on
Chinese, what you're doing with them?
Sure. So again, as I talked about, I think I talked about it here, maybe it was at dinner. I started a fund, a private equity fund. We invest in energy, mining, agriculture, logistics opportunities in Africa, direct investments. And as I was traveling around Asia, be it Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, the major institutional investors, major companies would say, that's great if you want to be a money manager, but what we really need is a company that can help us sort out our logistics in Africa. Because as they're going to build a mine, an oil field, a bridge, a road, a port, whatever it is, our logistics functions are killing us in cost and unreliability and delays and problems and all the rest. So we need your help doing that. And so the investment bank we've been working with had a company, a publicly listed company that had basically gone idle with cash in its balance sheet. And so they hired me to bring a management team and a business plan to build out an aviation and logistics business on the continent of Africa. It's being renamed Frontier Services Limited, Frontier Services Group Limited. And the first thing we're doing is building out an aviation capability. As I said, if you're going to go on safari in the next year and a half or so, have my number, because we can get you out of it. There's not one company in Africa that you can call right now that will get you within a few hours out of a difficult circumstance for a medevac, for people movement or whatever, and we'll do it at a Western, operationally excellent class of performance. It is public. That name was taken. No, the company is public, and we decided we wanted to be a public company to have that transparency, located in Hong Kong, because that's really the center through which all that Asian capital flows. And Asia has the appetite to invest in Africa. They need, as China's now the largest car market in the world, so they need aluminum for their wheels, and copper for their wires, and steel for the body panels, and it's a growing part of the world, and they need the resources. And it's right now it's listed as DVN Holdings, and the stock number is 500 on the Hang Seng Stock Exchange. And that was a pretty nice pitch to end on. Thank you.
Go to print.